Yakima has been a part of the Yakima culture and tradition for as long as anyone can remember. Today, hundreds of wild horses roam the Yakama Reservation. These and a small herd on the Colville Indian Reservation are the only known wild horses in the state of Washington. Fossil evidence indicates that ancestors to the horse first appeared in North America about 60 million years ago. These early ancestors were much smaller than the modern horse, and they lived mainly in swamps and forests. Fossils found in central Washington indicate that many different ancestors of the horse lived in this region. Over millions of years, prehistoric horses spread from North America to Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Mysteriously, however, all prehistoric horse types disappeared from North America somewhere about 10,000 years ago. Since time immemorial, Yakama ancestors have lived in central Washington, fishing, hunting, gathering food, and managing the resources as caretakers of the land. Tribal legend tells of horses that appeared during ancient times and lived near the swamps and forests. Later, the legend tells us horses of the dry lands and ridges came from the east. Historians agree that the Spanish-style horse or Mustang was introduced from Spain into Mexico in the 1500s. From there, Mustangs moved north and west with Indian traders. These horses arrived in the mid-Columbia region sometime in the mid-1700s. Once here, the Mustangs flourished on lush grasses that blanketed the area. Tribes and bands of the Yakama Nation quickly adopted the Mustang. These small, rugged horses were revered for their spirit, endurance, and independence. The presence of horses profoundly transformed Yakama tribal life. On horseback, families could travel long distances to fish, hunt, and gather food. Hunting parties could travel far to the east to hunt the plains bison. Horses pulling travois could carry all their possessions. By the early 1800s, the Yakama were known for their horsemanship and were selling horses to the explorers and early settlers. In 1806, Lewis and Clark record the purchases of horses from Yakama people near the mouth of the Yakima River. At this time, the Yakama possessed large numbers of horses. During the mid-1800s, the non-tribal population in central Washington expanded rapidly, mainly due to American and European immigrants. These settlers brought with them large numbers of cattle, sheep, and several breeds of large horses. In 1855, the current Yakama Reservation boundaries were established to include some mountains, dry shrub steppes, and prime agricultural land. The reservation quickly became home to large herds of cattle, sheep, and horses. In 1880, U.S. Army records indicate that the Yakama Reservation contained more than 17,000 horses, mostly Mustangs and most owned by tribal members. These small horses, recognized for their stamina and toughness, were sold to the U.S. Army or shipped overseas. In the early 1900s, gasoline-powered vehicles quickly became the primary means of transportation for both tribal and non-tribal people. While the numbers of cars and trucks increased, the demand for horses decreased. When they were no longer able to sell their horses, both tribal and non-tribal people released them into the hills around the reservation. Here, the large domestic horses and the smaller Mustangs intermingled and often interbred. However, the ability of the Mustang to adapt quickly to the harsh conditions of the dry shrub steppes favored Mustang characteristics over those of other breeds. Consequently, descendants of these feral horses roamed much of south-central Washington for many years. By the mid-1900s, most of the feral horses outside the borders of the reservation had been captured, killed, or slaughtered for use as fertilizer. Horses that roamed the closed portion of the reservation were protected, and here they adapted to the harsh conditions. After more than a century of free movement across much of the reservation, these horses represent the last major population of wild horses in Washington state. Today, wild horses can be found throughout much of the reservation, in the mountains, along the foothills, and across the dry shrub steppes. The largest concentration of wild horses is found among the canyons and plateaus, south of Topnish Ridge and west of Highway 97. Through the center of this area, Dry Creek and its tributaries have carved a network of steep canyons that are separated by sagebrush-covered ridges and plateaus. Several of these canyons converge on a geographic formation known as Dry Creek Elbow. This prominent geographic feature provides a natural crossroads for horses moving back and forth among the grazing areas around Dry Creek. Although most of this area is unsuitable for general agriculture, the plateaus and many of the canyon walls are covered with native grasses. Because grazing is available throughout most of the year, several bands of wild horses remain in the Dry Creek area year-round. Here, in the shadow of Patu, the Yakima people and wild horses have coexisted for as long as anyone can remember. Despite its name, Dry Creek flows year-round, from its origin in the Cascade Mountains to its mouth at Sadis Creek. Melting snow and rains from the mountains feed Dry Creek throughout the spring and much of the summer. In late summer and fall, water comes from natural springs along the way. This continuous supply of running water supports a lush riparian zone along the creek banks. Here, the dense vegetation provides food and shelter for a variety of birds, small animals, mule deer, as well as wild horses. This video will look at a year in the life of wild horses around Dry Creek and the environment in which they live. High above Dry Creek, in the Cascade Mountains, snow falls often during the winter months. Up here, a thick blanket of snow usually covers the ground for long periods. This makes life difficult for grazing animals such as deer, elk, and wild horses that roam these high mountains. At lower elevations, snow may cover the ground for only a few weeks in most years, especially on the plateaus that overlook Dry Creek. In this area, low ridges and a lack of trees provides animals with excellent visibility for miles around. Consequently, many wild horses tend to migrate into this area to graze between November and February. In late fall and early winter, forage consists mainly of dry leaves and stems left over from the previous summer. In midwinter, grazing improves as rains and light snows triggers the growth of cheat and other grasses. Because it is not yet breeding season, confrontations between stallions at this time of year are subdued. During the winter months, horses develop thick coats to protect against the strong winds and cold. Colts born the previous spring have grown to nearly 1/2 adult size. At this time, pregnant mares begin to enlarge rapidly. Colts and young adults run off some newly found energy as a curious coyote watches. Eventually, the horses need water. From the plateau above Dry Creek, they must descend several hundred feet down rocky slopes to reach the creek. As they make the descent, each horse finds its proper position in the file. As the band moves down the canyon, a dominant stallion chases away some of the younger stallions while the mares pause to watch. A dominant mare leads the band down the well-used trail. The other mares and their yearling colts follow in single file. Each adult position is determined by the mare's ranking within the band. The exiled bachelor stallions remain a respectful distance behind. On the steepest portions of the trail, it's every horse for itself. Ultimately, order is restored and the procession continues on towards the creek. After they drink, the various bands separate and move on to new pastures among the many canyons and plateaus. By mid-February, the first new foal of the year is born. Barely able to walk at birth, the newcomer is protected by its anxious mother. Within an hour or two, the new foal can follow its mother as she wanders across the shrub steppes around Dry Creek in search of new grass. By early April, the snow is gone. Daytime temperatures are increasing rapidly, and tender young grass is growing throughout Dry Creek drainage. A long-billed curlew searches for food among the new grass. Early spring flowers begin to appear in areas where grass is scarce. The south slope of Topnish Ridge is now velvety green. This lush new grass attracts many horses. They gather together on the open hillside to form a large, diffuse herd of more than 100 animals. However, each band retains its identity within the herd. On a ridge west of Dry Creek, a second large herd grazes on the new grass. Here too, each band remains apart. While the mares graze, stallions spend much of their time fighting to determine who will control each band. Fighting can continue for hours and involves all stallions of breeding age. Eventually, a truce is reached for today. To everyone's relief. As spring progresses, flowers appear everywhere. With breeding season approaching, the individual bands move to separate grazing areas. Here, the sexually mature mares begin estrus. The stallion quickly detects the mare's condition and displays a reaction by turning up his nose and sniffing the air. He then follows the mare, head down, ears laid back. This may be followed by gentle head-to-head nuzzling. This is followed by a period of inaction on the part of both participants. Soon, the stallion approaches the mare and performs a trial mount. Meanwhile, a young colt is unimpressed by adult behavior. Nearby, two mares carefully groom each other's tails, actions that strengthen the bond between band members. Again, the stallion approaches the mare for a trial mount. Other mares continue reciprocal grooming. Finally, after more head-to-head nuzzling, all conditions appear right. Compulation finished, the mare briefly acknowledges the stallion before she moves away. The mare resumes grazing while the stallion continues his watch. By late April, leaves and flowers begin to appear on the trees and shrubs along Dry Creek. The canyon walls are carpeted with flowers. Among the flowers and grass, a western rattlesnake tastes the air with its tongue looking for prey. It detects food nearby. Quickly, the snake moves out to investigate. It quietly approaches the young bird. However, the alert bird sees the approaching snake and quietly runs away. Meanwhile, a horned lark searches for insects among the wildflowers. Back at Dry Creek Elbow, two groups of horses move slowly towards the creek, grazing as they go. One group, a band, consists of a dominant stallion and several mares with colts of various ages. The second group contains 4 bachelor stallions. Suddenly, a yearling stallion from the band begins to taunt the bachelors, who quickly respond. This draws more taunts, which draws more responses. Finally, the young stallion offers a direct challenge. A challenge that is about to be accepted. However, the dominant stallion has seen enough. Head down and ears pinned back, he signals that it's time to back off. He quickly moves in to end a possible confrontation. Eventually, the stallion heads the band towards Dry Creek. Although the trail down is steep, the horses descend slowly and browse the sparse vegetation as they go. Once they get near the bottom, they move quickly to the water. Spring eventually gives way to summer. No rain has fallen in the Dry Creek area for several weeks. Daytime temperatures are now approaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Areas where wildflowers were abundant just a few days ago are now covered with only dried stems. Despite the stark surroundings, life goes on. nighthawks, horned lizards, sagebrush lizards, and rock wrens are common among the rocks above the creek. Sage sparrows, lark sparrows, northern shrikes, and western meadowlarks watch from sagebrush on the plateaus. In Dry Creek, steelhead smolts nibble on a dead crayfish, while a small snake looks on. On a nearby snag, two young kestrels beg for food, while a goldfinch watches the action. Horses graze mainly at night and in the cool early morning hours. During the heat of the day, they rest. Horses may stand for hours in a sleep-like state. Even the lookouts drowse. However, once the lead mare senses danger, she alerts the rest of the band. The mares and the colts gather around the leader and look for the threat as the stallion watches. Although they see no immediate threat, the mare leads the group away with the stallion trailing behind. By late summer, much of the dry grass on the hillsides is gone. Horses continue to graze on the steep canyon walls. As the mares graze, two young stallions practice their fighting skills. Suddenly, the lead mare senses danger and alerts the band. The band runs to safety at the bottom of the canyon. Here, other bands are grazing. Some of the horses lay down to sleep, while others sleep where they stand. As they sleep, some opportunistic magpies catch a few ticks. Meanwhile, the band of dark horses have crossed Dry Creek and began to climb a rock cliff in search of food. In autumn, the conditions remain hot and very dry. However, most of the horses appear in relatively good shape, despite the fact that they browse only on dry grass. By November, rain starts to fall on the plateaus, and snow falls in the hills. This moisture brings a new crop of grass around Dry Creek. Here, the Kusima prepare themselves for another winter.